was great, succinct and straight to the point, just what we need. Our next speaker is the delightful and enormously important Chris Williams. Chris used to be an MP. He was the Labour MP for Derby North. And I think you will all share with me, especially after you've heard it, that we cannot wait until Chris Williamson is our MP again. Thank you, Chris Williamson.
Well, thanks very much indeed for that introduction, Claudia, and I can't wait as well to have the opportunity. It would be wonderful to be on those green benches again, supporting the policy agenda that Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell have been espousing, the sort of thing that I have, alongside John and Jeremy and others, been espousing for many years. I've been a member of the Labour Party, despite my youthful appearance, for 40 years, and these sorts of ideas just didn't get any traction within the Labour Party for the vast majority of those years that I was in the Labour Party, but I stuck with it in the hope that one day we would get a socialist leader of the Labour Party. I remember chairing, if I may just sort of digress for a moment, a number of the People's Parliament sessions that John McDonnell organised before the last general election, and some of you may have gone along to some of them, and I chaired one on foreign policy. And one of the speakers was Jeremy Corbyn. And Jeremy was just outstanding. His knowledge of foreign policy was second to none. I'd kind of forgotten I was supposed to be chairing the meeting. I was sitting there listening to Jeremy, and I joked with him afterwards, saying, you know, wouldn't it be great to have you as our Shadow Foreign Secretary, or indeed our Foreign Secretary in a future Labour government? And we both guffawed with laughter at the preposterousness of such a suggestion. And 6 months later, Jeremy was the leader of our party. Isn't that fantastic? So yeah, it'd be great to have the opportunity to be back on those green benches, and I would certainly be giving us good, if not better, than some of the idiots inside the PLP have been given at PLP meetings where they've been slagging Jeremy off. And I certainly wouldn't have stood around, I can tell you, and allowed them to get away with that without getting a piece of their own medicine. Anyway, to get on to the topic that we want to discuss today, there are two messages really I want to try and put across the can this morning. And I think essentially what we're talking about here is a relatively straightforward and simple message. I mean, you know, sociologists talk about the conspiracy of the professionals and how economics, I mean, I'm not saying it's a straightforward and simple topic, it isn't. But ultimately, the message that we're trying to get across is a straightforward and simple one. And it's really important, therefore, that all of us in this room go from this place and actually impart this message to the wider general public, because it can't all be left to John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn and people like Claudia on the National Executive Committee. This is a campaign that is a bottom-up campaign, and it's one that we've all got to participate in order to overcome the hostility that we are experiencing in the mainstream media. So the first part of what I want to say in terms of the very simple message that we want to get across to everybody is an obvious one, really, and that is that austerity doesn't work. It never has worked at any time it's ever been tried anywhere in the country. We saw what happened in the 1930s, didn't we, when we tried austerity then? It led to a catastrophic depression. And we only started to really recover from that depression, from that mass unemployment and mass poverty, when we started preparing for the Second World War. And as Tony Benn said, if we can find the money to kill people, surely we can find the money to help people. And that's all we're saying in reality. But you know, when you just look at what the Tories said in terms of the need for austerity and how they would be judged on the success of their policy prospectus, well, they haven't succeeded at all, have they? Because one of the first things they said was they were going to eliminate the deficit by 2015. Well, they got nowhere near eliminating the deficit. And as we all know, they then recalibrated that and said, oh, well, we'll get rid of it by, midway through this Parliament or certainly by 2020. They've now abandoned that, as we all know, completely because they know it's not a tenable proposition. They also told us, of course, that Labour borrowed too much. And yet, they haven't cut borrowing, has they? They've actually increased it by more than £500 billion. So they've failed on the deficit, they've failed on borrowing, and they've also failed in terms of a gross domestic product, because the GDP, Britain's GDP, is barely clambered back to the level it was before the financial crash. And Michael talked about productivity and how we lag way behind the G7 countries. On average, we're 19% behind the G7 nations. So clearly this austerity agenda isn't working. And one thing which I think is perhaps more important than any of those other things in terms of the message to the wider general public is the fact that the policy agenda that's been pursued since the crash has led to a real-term reduction in wages of 10.4%. So people are getting worse off, as we know, and we need to actually be making that case, I think, very strongly on the doorstep and in the pubs and the clubs and at home and in the workplace. Because in addition to that, people are working in this country longer than anywhere else in Europe. And there was a report out, wasn't there, recently, about a month ago, which showed the precarious state of millions of households in this country. 17, you probably saw the report, 17 million people have got less than 100 quid in the bank. 17 million people. That's an astonishing statistic when you consider that Britain has still got the 5th or 6th biggest economy anywhere in the world. What a scandal that we're in that state. And if you look at the figures from the Second World War, when that post-war consensus was put in place by the Attlee Labour government, every single year a bigger and bigger proportion of the national income was going to workers in their wage packets up until the late 1970s. And since then, it's been going in the opposite direction. And that's left us with this terrible situation now where there are so many people in poverty. And the biggest rise in poverty has been in-work poverty. And that's been driven by, obviously, downward pressure on jobs, globalisation, and companies like Rolls-Royce in my home city of Derby, offshoring highly skilled jobs to low-wage economy. And to add insult to injury, they've had £500 million, Rolls-Royce, over the last decade or so, for research and development from the government. And when those new products have been brought to market, they've been manufactured, many of them, in low-wage economies. I mean, it's ridiculous. We're using taxpayers' money to give to these corporate scroungers to develop new products, and then they maximise their profits by manufacturing them, not in this country, that gave them the assistance to develop those new products, but they manufacture them in low-wage economies. So it clearly ain't working, and we've got, I don't know if people saw or have seen anything about this notion of micro-jobs, this explosion in micro-jobs, where, the precarious nature we've got, as we know, millions of people reliant upon zero-hour contracts. People now are looking, to do work in the sort of micro-jobs, whereby they look, peruse websites. They might get a job for an hour or a day if they're lucky. We're going back, aren't we, 100 years? To the kind of precarious state of play for ordinary working people, where all the power was in the hands of the employers and ordinary working people had very little power at all. And obviously only through the effort of working people banded together in trade unions were we able to try and reverse that a little bit. We never ever got to where I think we should have done, and despite all the propaganda that we used to hear in the 1970s when it was told that, or suggested that, trade unions got too much power. So that's the problem. What do we do about it? Well, I think the very clear thing, and Michael's touched on this, is the need for us to invest in the economy. It's a very straightforward proposition, isn't it? That we need to invest in our economy. And if we don't invest in our economy, we end up with the situation that we find ourselves in today. And this notion of lack of investment in this nation isn't a new phenomenon. It's got worse because the state has withdrawn from this notion of investing in our economy. But if you think of industries like the shipbuilding industry, that failed to invest. And in the 1950s, its order books were massive, were full to overflowing as a result of all the shipping that had been lost in the Second World War. And there was a really interesting documentary years ago I remember watching, where people were saying, workers that were working in the shipbuilding industry were saying that we were using machinery that had been built to manufacture these ships in the 19th century. Little wonder then that we were overtaken by competitors in the far east. So we need to invest in our economy, and if we invest in our economy, we will generate the decent jobs that people need in order to grow our economy. We've got to invest in manufacturing, and when we give grants to organisations, companies like Rolls-Royce, there should be a quid pro quo. Yes, we'll use the state, the public purse, to invest in the economy, in your industry, in your company, but we want something in return for that. So when these new products are developed, we want to see those products being manufactured in this country so that we create jobs and maintain jobs inside the United Kingdom. The commitment that Jeremy's outlined in relation to renewable energy is another really important agenda. Not only is it important in terms of meeting our climate change commitments outlined in, and enshrined indeed, in law in the Climate Change Act, but that would generate huge numbers of jobs as well. And we'd be able to tackle the scandal of fuel poverty in this country, where every single winter in Britain, thousands of people die because of the consequences and the health conditions that they contract as a result of living in cold houses. This doesn't happen in colder climates in Scandinavia. Why is that? Because they invest in their housing stock. I mean, I think it's standard now in Sweden, for example, on new homes to have quadruple glazing, for example. So by investing in renewable energy, by investing in making sure that people's homes are properly insulated, you not only tackle the scandal of fuel poverty, you also deal with the problem of energy security. You also generate lots of jobs in every single constituency as well. So renewable energy, home insulation, really important. The commitment that we've talked about in terms of setting up a national investment bank to invest in this type of thing, to invest in our infrastructure, again, will generate jobs inside the United Kingdom, and not just in the public sector, because if the private sector have the confidence that the economy is growing, that the government is serious about investing in our economy, that will then see private sector investment coming forward, because there are many companies in this country that have got literally billions of pounds on their balance sheets that they're not investing, and we've got to unlock that as well. That will be brought about, I think, by a government which is committed to investing in our economy, to investing in infrastructure, renewable energy and manufacturing, and of course housing as well. The scandal of homelessness and people living in inadequate accommodation in our country is appalling. And I often give this anecdote. Back in the 1970s, when I was an apprentice bricklayer, I was earning enough money as a 19-year-old apprentice bricklayer, albeit in Derby, but it was possible even in places like London for working class people to aspire to buy their own home. We were earning enough money, myself and my girlfriend at the time, to buy a brand new 3-bedroom semi-detached house backing onto a waterfront in a desirable village 8 miles south of Derby. It is impossible now for working class people, for many middle class people for that matter, youngsters, to be able to aspire to buy a home of their own. And that's why we have a massive housing crisis, because property prices have gone through the roof and councils have been prevented from building the homes that people need. So an investment in council housing, and we've talked about building 1 million homes, 500,000 of which in the next Parliament would be council houses. You tackle the social need, when there's a massive social need because of the housing crisis, and you also generate huge numbers of jobs. And according to the Home Builders Federation, who've done some research on this, each house that is built will actually create 4.3 jobs. So 500,000 houses, council houses, on its own, never mind the other 500,000, we're talking at around about 800,000 or 900,000 jobs being generated. So you actually stimulate the economy. You create demand in the economy, growth in the economy as a result of investing in housing, tackling that social need and creating demand by putting money in the pockets of ordinary people. Because far too much money, as we know, and Michael touched on this point, over the years, really since the late 1970s, more and more of it has been accreted to the richest 1% in the nation. And yes, they'll spend a lot of money, and many of these people are earning 500, 1,000 times more than the average worker earns in Britain, but they haven't got 1,000 times more stuff. They haven't got 1,000 more houses or 500 more houses than anybody else, or 1,000 pair of shoes, or some of them might have. But you know what I mean? I mean, it's again a fairly simple and straightforward message that by growing the economy, creating decent, well-paid, secure jobs in our nation, you're putting money in the pockets of people on middle earnings, low and middle earnings, and they will spend that money. And that in turn will help to create this economic virtuous circle by spending money and therefore helping to sustain other jobs in the economy. And the benefit of that is that as well as clamping down, as we've heard other speakers, Kelvin and others this morning, on tax evasion, and that's important, and he mentioned the point, Richard Murphy has identified 120 billion every year is evaded. And I think nobody's saying that, we'll be able to collect all that, but by certainly investing in a properly resourced HMRC, we'll be able to collect a damn sight more of that. But the fact of actually growing our economy, creating decent jobs, getting more people into employment, more secure employment, inevitably then, that generates a greater tax take for the Treasury, which in turn can then be invested in public services, which are desperately needed. We need a massive investment, don't we, in social care in our country. We need a national social care service comparable with the National Health Service, and we need more investment in our National Health Service, and we need more investment in our local authorities. Local authorities, public services, have been seen as a cash cow by the private sector, by the privateers, who see it as an opportunity to make money. And how do they make their money? They make their money by diminishing often the quality of the service and by squeezing the terms and conditions of the workers working in those areas. And so you get this kind of opposite effect of an economic virtuous circle. You get a downward spiral because people have got less and less money in their pocket, more and more inferior public services. So what we're talking about, it's really simple. Austerity does not work, that's clear, by any objective measure. And by investing in the economy, not only do you generate and create jobs in manufacturing, in construction, in the digital economy, in renewable energy, you also, by doing that, generate the tax revenues which you can then invest in our public services. And let's be clear, public services define a decent society, do they not? And in many circumstances around our country, we haven't got a decent society because people are sleeping rough on the street, elderly people are getting inadequate care if they're getting any care at all, 15-minute calls and things like that. Totally unacceptable and totally wrong. So I think there is a very clear, easy way forward. But it's a message that we've got to take from this room. It's really important that we come together and discuss these ideas, but we've got to take these ideas out to the wider public. And if we do that, it's simple, plain common sense. It ain't a matter about being extreme left-wing. It's simple common sense. Let's get out there and make that case. And if we do that, I'm certain that we can win this election. And it is so crucial that we do that, because another Tory government would be utterly disastrous, I think, for the vast majority of the public in this country, but particularly those who are most vulnerable. So let's all of us stand together and just remember that Labour movement maxim: unity is strength. Solidarity, comrades. Thank you.